And I approached him as a skeptic.
You said, like, thinking not just a skeptic, but a non-believer, saying there's nothing to this.
Not a non-believer as much as I wanted the facts, I wanted the evidence to lead us to whatever the final solution would be. And it's when you speak to the first-hand witnesses, especially of a case of this nature, and they're able to talk beyond just a fleeting light through the sky or a photograph or something that may have touched down on the ground, and they start talking about, as Stan had the wonderful experience of speaking with the late Major Jesse Marcel, the intelligence officer of the 509th Bomb Group, and to listen to the people who, as far as totally describe precisely what he did. The memory material, paper-thin material that you couldn't scratch, you couldn't bend, and yet other materials that you could crumble and crease and lay down onto the smooth surface and would flow like water. We don't even have such material by today's standards that right before your eyes such a demonstration could take place. And it quickly makes you realize that you still may be correct in your initial assessment, that it may be something prosaic, but you don't take the chance that you may be totally wrong and you just drop the ball. So you have to go back and go back and go back and go back until the case demonstrates before yourself as well as your colleagues that it's more than just a balloon.
Right, so where was that moment that where it clicked for you and we went from skeptic to say, oh my God, this is something here?
When the very rancher's son, Bill Brazo Jr., sitting with his wife, Shirley, and her describing how every night he would come home working the ranch and reach into his leather chaps and pull out this piece of shiny metal. And she would watch how he would try to carve on it and poke his pocket knife through it and hold his lighter up to it. Nothing have any effect. And then she would watch as he would wad it up into a ball and then place it onto the table, and it would just flow smooth right out. And then he would just sit there and smile and looked at us and said, yeah, some kind of weather balloon, wasn't that?
Linda, yeah, thank you, Don.
In addition to hard physical evidence, like in the animal mutilations and crop formations and other phenomena, the one thing that I think over the years of my career that has kept me going are the people who have served in military or police or some service authority or even some of the intelligence agencies, and they come forward because they are so angry. And they are angry because once upon a time when they became a military person, and they were fighting or working for their country, and then they end up being involved in an encounter with something that falls into the extraterrestrial category, and then somebody is standing in front of them and telling them, you keep your mouth shut, you never saw this. If you utter a word from now to the day you die, your family will lose pension. And I have seen so much of that. And then what I and others become, we are then the translator for people who have sought us out to tell us the truth about what had happened. And in their anger over being forced by lies and being forced by Alice in Wonderland and 1984 Newspeak that nothing exists that they know, it gets especially, I think, to the heart and the soul of an American. And that we are still at a time when those of us who were raised from the 40s, 50s, 60s, when the United States stood for a government of, by, and for the people, that when you get into the investigations of everything related to extraterrestrial and technology, it is a completely different government. It is a government of control and lies and policies of denial and black budgets.
Yeah.
And what you begin to realize is we came out of World War II as the 800-pound gorilla on this planet, and we were looked at with respect. And yet the irony is, out of that exact same war came all of these corrupting policies of denial and lies about extraterrestrials, because maybe they were super patriotic decisions in the beginning, the world's not ready. But it moved very quickly to, we will get all of this technology, we will shoot down the craft that we can, we will get them into American corporations, we will back engineer this technology, trillions of dollars will be made by corporations, and we will have the weapons of the world instead of, we are not alone, non-humans are interacting with the planet, and out of World War II, this government in England, Australia, New Zealand, and Canada could have been honest with the whole world and pulled the rug out from under the Nazis.
I think that's what we're correcting here. Richard.
Yeah, I'm really glad Linda brought these points up because that was really wonderful, Linda. You know, my very first book wasn't titled UFOs. It was titled UFOs and the National Security State. I wrote this, finished it a year before 9/11. And when I look at it, I'm actually proud of the fact that I had that title before 9/11. I feel like I was onto something. The relationship of the UFO phenomenon to the American government in particular was really my theme in that book. And you know, what you find is that the American government's reaction to the UFO problem of the 1940s has really been one of the key things that has damaged this country. It's not the only thing, but it is an important thing that's been very damaging to our political system. And it is one of the key formations of what we call our black budget. Not the only, but an important one. If you recover technology, exotic technology at Roswell, and I believe elsewhere, you need, from their point of view, a highly classified and expensive program to fund it. You can't just get that from ordinary tax dollars. You've got to classify that. You have to do an end run around the Constitution, and you're basically destroying your country in order to maintain this secrecy. So in other words, you know, in dealing with the absolute reality of this phenomenon, and there's, by the way, if no one is familiar with this, there's an overwhelming abundance of documentary evidence discussing how military personnel have encountered these things, and they've found them baffling, and they've found them, took them seriously. That's an open and shut case. That's a real thing. We have thousands of pages of documents through the Freedom of Information that prove this. They don't suggest it, they don't hint, they prove it. So that phenomenon's real, and the response to this has been a very corrosive influence on the American Republican system, and really, by extension, on the global political system, because the Americans dominate it. So really, in ending the secrecy on this topic, whether or not our civilization's ready for it, to me, the most important thing is not even the scientific benefits or the even the consciousness benefits that might accrue or the opening of our culture. The real benefit of ending secrecy is reclaiming, or at least attempting to reclaim, some semblance of a true Republican free system based on liberty of individuals and openness of government. That's what it's about for me.
Is that what drives?
Yeah, it's a liberation movement to the truth about ETs, is liberate humanity.
That is, we are part of a liberation movement. I think people here who know that, what can they do? What do you suggest? I mean, what does anyone suggest? Okay, we know, most everyone here, that something exists, and it's not our little bubble. We're not going to take this bubble with us out into... I feel we can do something. I don't know what that is.
I would say a couple of things we could do. One is we can educate ourselves as well as we can. It's hard work, but there are good sources of information on this. It's good for all of us to know them. We're in a point in our culture now where things like YouTube affect millions and millions of people. So there's a lot of great ways for people to learn about this. And the other thing we can do, in addition to being knowledgeable, is to be brave in our personal lives. And you know, once we leave this area here, you go out and you do everything that you can bravely. Don't worry about it. If people don't accept you, so what? Most people don't understand their own situation in life or themselves, much less you. So really, if they're negative about you, just take it in stride. I think what we have to do is be brave and go out there and with knowledge help spread the word.
Or even just personal contact. I mean, how many people have had some sort of contact experience here? And are you...
Audiences can become black.
I know, but are you willing to share that in a way that maybe people will believe you or not? She's shaking her head. Yeah, I think she already has.
Great.
So
You know what?
we'll keep doing it.
I'd like to say, Alan, is one of the things that I'm a little afraid of is that events like this become anxious about trying to convince people and convince the outside world that are not here about all these events.
I don't know about convincing. If you just share your experience.
Exactly. So what happens here should not be an attempt at trying to convince others.
I agree.
Look, there are aliens.
Right,
they've been
right,
here. Like,
right.
stop, don't do that.
No, but if
they don't wanna,
You don't have to be an evangelist.
If people have seen
But
something,
you don't have to be afraid to talk.
if people had an
that's what
experience, then I think
So
not
let
to
me
be
let
afraid
me
to share
complete my
it.
statement.
Yeah.
We should avoid trying to desperately to convince others, but go out there and tell your truth. Tell what you know and let the people decide whether they think you're a crank or whether you're a really smart guy who's seen something and wants to share the truth and the information with the world. This knowledge and information, as some of the panelists here have mentioned, between 60 and 90% of the population believe that we're not alone. So you don't have to convince anybody. It's just larger numbers of people need to get together and share their information and let these kind of gatherings become the main stream and not the fringe. And the more we do this, the more this is going to become the mainstream and no longer the fringe. In fact, I believe it is already the mainstream.
Right.
And the only thing that we don't perceive it to be the mainstream is because it's not in the mainstream media. But if you actually look at who's really watching the mainstream media, are the porridge eaters, as Louise likes to call them, who are the people that need to be informed and woken up. And it is then our duty to go and do that job.
Exactly.
But do it gently.
Yes.
Don't scare them.
No. Linda.
And reinforcing all of this, I see it every week in the work that I do at Earth Files and for Coast and Dreamland and all of the radio that I do. I get so much feedback from people who will email or phone and say, I heard you on the radio, or I saw you on television, or you had somebody on who said X, and I've never told anyone this before, but after hearing that story, I want you to at least know. And out of 10 of those, maybe 5 will be willing to go on the record and tell theirs. And it really is a pollination that gets feedback just because more people now are more willing to go on the record, and I'm seeing a change. They are willing to go on the record with their names. It used to be nobody would let
How many times have people said to you, "This, I've never told anyone this before"?
Oh, hundreds.
Hundreds.
Same here.
Same with you.
Oh, yes, yeah.
Well, Danny, when John Mack put his career on the line by saying abduction is not a psychosis, and Harvard wanted to fire him for that, what do you think that did when he, in a sense, legitimized this movement? Something changed, I think, at that moment with John Mack.
Well, it was
for us.
As I say, it was an extremely interesting point in time because people tend to view Harvard University as being representative of a certain kind of authority in the culture. And for them to have dug in the way they did and try to insist that their scientific, logical, positivist, materially grounded reality was all there was, and that anybody who tried to even open a dialogue or ask questions about other dimensions of reality, other aspects of reality, some other potential worldview, it became obvious to John that this was representative of a major doorway for our human family to actually cross into this other realm. And as I've indicated before in some of my talks here, that's what's now being recognized, that this reaching out and establishing contact with another extraterrestrial civilization is going to have an absolutely inevitable impact upon the worldview of our people. And the simple question is, and we keep on encountering it here in our panel, is whether or not we're going to sit around and wait for the government to tell us it's true, drip by drab, or whether the church is going to tell you it's true or not. The key is for us to reach out, cross that line, and it's a very personal thing. Is are you going to be willing to go out and stand beneath the stars and actually reach out and try to communicate with these beings? Instead of saying, oh, it's really interesting, isn't this an interesting feeling I get when I see the stars, but to step through the threshold and reach out to communicate telepathically with these beings and participate in this process. That's the key. This is as I said this morning, this is a citizens diplomacy undertaking here. And we need to cross through and do this. And as I say, it's not to ignore the fact that there's an established order that's trying to hold on to the woodwork, basically, so they can maintain control over the resources of the world. But the fact of the matter is that with this new worldview that's coming into place now, which is integrally related to this existence of this extraterrestrial civilization, it's a dimension of truth. It's a dimension of truth that is knocking right on the door, that's hovering right off stage. It's ready to happen, and we need to participate actively in making it happen. And I can tell you, I'm convinced that these sinful structures, these structures of injustice that we've been talking about, will start to atrophy, because you can actually direct our attention toward growing a new world. Not having to be attached to the old world, and that there are some tactical steps, by all means, that need to be taken in this process. But once you make the strategic decision, then the tactical decisions will follow after it. And that's what we have to do, I believe.
No, I agree, and I think we're so... Thank you, Dan. And I think this question of this passionate movement is that, in a sense, we're so into this that we maybe have perhaps forgotten that the ET recognition that we're connected to something bigger is the momentous point in human history. I mean, and that changes everything. It's a total game changer. Richard, you've talked, yes. And I think because we're so used to this, that the idea that this is real, we forget perhaps how big a game changer that is.
I felt for a while we're at an interesting interim moment in our history of our species, our civilization. I mean, think of it this way: there's almost certainly, I think, been visitation or presence of these other beings, probably for a really, really, really long time, and for most of that time, I'm guessing that they've had a much easier go at it. If someone 500 years ago in any part of the world were to see what we would consider a UFO or another being, what would they really be able to do about it? Not a whole lot. It might be something to go into an oral history tradition, or might get written down in a chronicle. But in the last century, look what human civilization's been able to do. We've taken to the air, we've developed radio and television and rocketry and some serious weapons and electronic means of detection, and now we're into advanced computing and quantum computing. I mean, we're just going up on literally an exponential level. And so what that means is that the, let's call it the advanced guard of our civilization in terms of technology, I'm talking about the military-industrial complex, they've become aware that there is this definite presence. That's not a question for them. And what they're trying to do, this is why we're at an interim, they're trying to hold that knowledge back from the rest of the world.
Right, only for so long.
Right, only for so long, because the rest of the world is, I mean, fast becoming quite aware that, oh, indeed, there's this other presence as well. So I think at some point, this is just going to end. And it's just going to be, everyone's going to become aware of this.
And I think, you know, you just have to dig a little bit on the internet. Anyone who doesn't believe this, just tell them to look up UFOs. But
everything's happened so fast in the last really 20 years.
And the internet
and where will we be in another 20?
Right. So we are connected as a global mind, a global community. But this idea of finally this truth coming forward. In your books, you talk about how it then totally rearranges the human psyche, in a sense. And
our interaction with this phenomenon, you know, Jacques Vallée wrote about this many years ago. I certainly wasn't the first person, but excuse me, our interaction with this phenomenon has had tremendous transformation of our society. And it's continuing to work us in ways that I think only in the distant future we'll be able to look back and say, ah, yes, this is how it's happened. But our interaction with them not only has affected our popular culture, but has affected our scientific culture in terms of classified technologies, and has affected the relationship of us to government, government to us. And it's been very, very transformative in positive and in dark ways as well. Not necessarily from them, but in terms of our reaction. But we're not done. The whole process isn't done yet. And so we've got more transformations to take place. But this has been a very important part. Yeah. And other historians and other analysts, at some point, they need to start looking at this and seeing how what we call the UFO phenomenon has really seriously affected human civilization.
Definitely. Danny, what were you going to say about that?
No, I'm fine. Don's
Don, go ahead.
I still remain more pessimistic.
Oh, come on, Don.
We're amongst us friends here, but
right.
Just think, and I made the point yesterday, this week we all go back to our regular jobs and our regular communities and everything, and how many of us are going to be able to say where we spent this past weekend?
They will.
That's wonderful, that's great, but I think back to even when Dennis Kucinich talked about his UFO experience.
Yeah.
And automatically he became the UFO candidate, and that was the end of any chance that he had as far as becoming the candidate for the Democratic Party.
He wasn't as forthright as he needed to be. It's easy to Monday morning quarterback Mr. Kucinich, and I admire him. But
Why vote anyway? It's all rigged.
It's why vote anyway.
He backed down.
But if I just might finish, I mean, the ridicule factor is still very much alive. The government has done a tremendous job indoctrinating and dismissing this subject as far as the public over these past 70 years for a reason. And it's one of the reasons that they are now up to 4 explanations concerning Roswell.
Right. But let's talk to Stanton, who's seen, I think, a little bit of change in the history of this movement. Haven't you, Stanton? Please say yes.
Not a hell of a lot.
No?
I think one thing I find is that people are more ready to admit that they've seen a UFO than they would have been years ago. But there hasn't been a really major change, again because of the media, in helping the public understand what's going on. Look, I've only had 11 hecklers and over 700 lectures, and I come on very strong. And 2 of them were drunk, I better add. And you get that many people giving you a hard time about sports, religion, politics, or anything. So we're at a point where people are ready to accept the truth, but they live in a world in which they think nobody else is ready to accept the truth.
Well, but there's more of us now, right?
Well, I'm not sure. Putting action to thought is the big problem, I think. How many teachers will teach a seminar on UFOs? How many professors, there have been more than a dozen PhD theses. How many professors are willing to sponsor one? Or even to look at the ones that exist? There is strong resistance on the part of the ancient academics and fossilized physicists to this whole question. Naysaying newsmen, too, will throw in them. I like alliteration. So I personally never worry about it because I can handle anything that's been tossed at me. I wasn't sure of that at the beginning, but I am now. But we need to go farther to get the people who are influencing all the other people to do their homework and not let them get away with making... Look, when the Astronomer Royal of England said a couple of years back, only kooks see UFOs, I saw no rebuttal of that, except in something that I wrote. It's a dumb viewpoint. It has no basis in fact. But nobody corrected it.
But there's been a movement of ridicule that's been paid by the Air Force, and but this is why it's a grassroots movement that's happening with a weekend like this, and why it keeps growing. That's what I see.
Well, I hope it keeps growing, and I don't know what it will accomplish, but I'm an optimist still, or I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing.
Okay.
Well, how many, just the people on this panel and many others out there that are often speakers at events like this, how many invitations do you get per annum today as opposed to 5 or 10 years ago?
You're getting more, right?
A lot more.
A lot more.
I get invitations, 50 invitations a year to come here, there, from Brazil to Spain to Ireland to India to all over the world.
And so does Richard and Linda. And
so it just shows you that it's a global phenomenon that is becoming acceptable. People want to know. People are inquisitive.
I have to agree.
So we're doing the job. We are becoming the mainstream. It's not a fringe movement.
Yes.
You know, I keep reminding people there are more scientists in the world that work outside of academic institutions than they are working inside of academic institutions. So you don't need to be attached to a university if you're a scientist. You can be a scientist and work in your garage, but you're still a scientist. And once again,
where's the money come from?
Well, now this brings me to the next subject. All along this evening, I've been listening very carefully, and virtually every one of these panelists at some stage has mentioned the word money. Okay, and it's somehow an obstacle to the progress. There's the black budget and this money, and Stanton didn't have money to go to Roswell and all this, and so you start to realize what's even behind this thing. It's always, until we recognize what is going on this planet, who is really pulling the strings, who is controlling the governments, that are then controlling the flow of information, that are controlling the media, the mainstream media. And until we recognize that and deal with that issue, we're going to be debating this for the next 20 years until something else happens, or for the next 100 years. And this
Are you
is the
preaching
issue
revolution here?
Yeah, he is.
I am preaching a revolution here. Absolutely,
That's what has
a
to
revolution
happen.
of consciousness.
We need a revolution.
And a recognition where the evil comes from. And when I say the word evil, I mean that in a spiritual context, and not in a.
This is just too obvious an opportunity to respond to this. Is that the things that we'd mentioned before is that we need to understand that Pope Francis is getting set to issue a papal encyclical, right in June, right here, coming up, in which he's going to directly connect the process of global climate change with transnational corporate capitalism, and if in fact they don't respond by accepting mandatory limits on the global greenhouse gas emissions in the Paris meetings between November 28th and December 11th, he's prepared on December 8th to declare a Jubilee year to order the canceling of debt and eliminate the basic capitalist structure.
The Pope can do that?
The Pope, Francis.
What about like student loans?
Listen, look, you've got to understand. You've got to understand what's going on. Is that we're not talking about just somebody who's throwing holy water on people here. We're talking about somebody who's starting to move into a position of having moral authority that's almost unprecedented on the planet right now.
I would caution against, as exciting as it may sound, do not underestimate the deviousness of these banking global.
Oh no! I don't.
They plan these things so well.
I don't underestimate that. But one thing I can tell you that they don't plan on is the calling of a Jubilee year, canceling all the debt on the planet.
But you know what happens?
They don't anticipate that.
How can he actually do that?
Recognize a deception in that. Hold on. Cancelling the debt doesn't mean cancelling the monetary control and the financial control over humanity. That's like putting a Band-Aid on the global problem, and then it starts all over again.
Well,
that's what we got to deal with.
Actually, when you're dealing with a monetary system that is so grounded in debt itself, that the entire underpinnings of the banking system, with its fractal banking and everything else, is rooted in debt. It's the constant indebting of people and keeping them from paying off the principal and carrying the debt. What I'm suggesting,
especially
to you,
on fabricated money.
That's right. But all I'm saying to you is that what's happening, what's going to be happening between now and December 8th of this year, I'm just suggesting that you direct your attention to what's going on here.
Do you have to be Catholic?
Francis has called for and has had an agreement now. He's going to be addressing the Joint Assembly of the entire United Nations in September. He's declaring he's going to be issuing a papal encyclical declaring that the proximate relationship between global climate change and transnational corporate capitalism is the reflection of a sinful structure, a sinful economic system, a system that is rooted in injustice and greed and avarice. He's naming the beast. He's belling the cat. And what I'm saying is that he's calling for the creation of a new, completely alternative economic order on the planet. Now, so what I'm saying is this is responsive to the very things that are being said here at the table. And the fact is that if in fact the nation states don't accept mandatory and legally enforceable restrictions on their corporations, that he's going to in fact call for the Jubilee year on December 8th. And so people need to, all I'm saying, look, people need to understand